The title of today's lesson is Christians Go Against the Tide. True Christians are men and women who go against the tide. In the normal world, marked by sin and showing itself through selfishness and injustice, Christians walk in the opposite direction. Not due to an argumentative spirit, but due to a loyalty of principle and faith. They want to follow the teachings of Christ Jesus. Christians travel this path filled with love for their fellow person, and viewing it as an abject failure if they fall into the temptation by responding to evil with evil, acting out violence for revenge. For the Christian person fights against injustice, inequity, and for love, using the gospel and the love of Christ Jesus. Without jaws, without claws, and without weapons of any kind, a Christian fights with his or her love. This is the most powerful weapon than any other ever devised. It is fiercer than any threats made against them. For the Christian's love and the witness of them bearing forth is stronger, lasts longer, and goes further than any weapon or any other thing on the face of the earth. So just earlier last week, we had our first reading. We're asked, how will you defeat this? And the answer was, only love. For love alone conquers injustice. Love alone conquers hate. Love alone conquers inequity. Love alone will balance the scales and make this world perfect for all those living at the bottom and wishing to rise up just a bit as the people at the top rise up so very much. But those at the bottom just want their boat to rise up a bit as all others are rising too. It only seems fair. And that is what also the great economist of Adam Smith wrote. When you have a country, all ships or boats must rise with the tide together, whether that tide be of the water or that tide be economic, it matters not. For the tide must rise all boats equally, else the tide is inequitable and cannot happen. The inequitable tide will destroy itself and destroy all boats that it tries to raise. When you look at the United States, there are ships that have raised and other ships that have not. And what do you see in this economy right now? But it tearing itself apart. because the inflation hits the wealthy the most. There is your equity. They too must pay, but because they are at a higher level of income, because they are higher in the flood, in the tide, with their vast billions of funds, they must pay far, far greater taxes. They must pay far greater use taxes, meaning for every vehicle they own, for every house they own, for every property they own, whether it be under their name or an entity, they will be paying 3 to 17 times greater, because the wealthy carry the burden during a time of recession and inflation. None of you remember the inflationary times in the 1960s, 70s. You may have been alive, but you don't recall it, because this is 40 and 50 years ago. Nobody was paying attention then. But these rich people who took so much when Trump was in office, the orange one is all I will call him from here on. But they took so much of the wealth of the United States. Now, the United States is knocking and saying, time to pay up. Looking at the orange one's taxes, even the ones that were, shall we say, using creative accounting means, these show that his company, his family, will pay in excess of $472 million in this annum. And that is just on interest income from his supposed shares in companies. Doesn't that make you just a little bit happy? He is paying more than $400 million just on interest income. His daughter and his 2 idiot sons will similarly be paying in excess of $400 million just on the interest of their investments. They couldn't touch them this year because of everything going on. And the mother of the children just died. So they will be hit with inheritance taxes because she refused to put those properties into a trust for them. She paid taxes on them up to the day of her death. And the boys and the girl will pay taxes just to access them. Ivanka will be getting 4 properties, 20 to 25 pieces of jewels and miscellaneous cash items, to a total of 1,700,000 million, or $1.7 billion. The boys will each be getting a similar but slightly smaller amount. And there are taxes on every item. Taxes to the state of New York, taxes to the United States government. So, where their boat was rising, it's now coming down again, because the inequity had to be balanced. Martyrs have great strength when faced with their supreme trials, and so too will you. This strength is a sign of the great hope that God animates in us, that nothing and no one can separate any of us from God's love given to us in His Son, Jesus Christ.